I'll be asking all these panelists, our panelists, I think our panelists are there. I am seeing only Dr. Om Lakhani, one of the panelists. I don't see other panelists. I'm not sure.
Dr. Shivendra is there. Dr. Shivendra is there.
At Dr. Shivendra is here. So I'll ask one by one. Okay, Dr. Lakhani, yeah, Dr. Shivendra is here. Dr. Lakhani,
Yes,
what
sir.
is your opinion? How do you see that low dose therapy, phytotherapy, we have got already the benefit in the other coronary disease, that is hypertension, where low dose and multiple phytotherapy that is being recommended. So here also, this multiple, there is multiple combinations from the very beginning in diabetes. How do you see? Is it not relevant, or you don't agree with that?
No, I agree with your point. In fact, I agree with the fact that I love the fact that you started with the omnius octet. And I think the important point we have to understand is that type 2 diabetes is not unifactorial disease. It's a complex multifactorial disease where you have multiple pathogenesis being involved in the process. So on one hand, you have beta cell dysfunction. On the other hand, you have insulin resistance. You also have adipose related issues. You also have kidney related issues. You have SGLT2 being sort of up titrated and so on and so forth. So there are multiple pathogenic process which are involved in the type 2 diabetes management. And I completely agree that the more of these pathogenesis that we target early on, the more likely we are to achieve long-term good glycemic control. And we also seen, like you rightly said, in Verify study, in fact, many other studies have shown that the earlier you start, though low dose or adequate dose
Yes.
of oral antidiabetic drug in combination, which have different pathophysiological processes, the more likely you are to achieve good glycemic control early, as well as to maintain a good sustained glycemic control.
It's not going as per we decided.
Thank you.
For a long period of time.
Thank you, Dr. Lakhani. So, Dr. Shivendra, so what is, we have got multiple, you see, Dr. Ponda has shown us that is a combination of glimepiride and metformin. We have got also other combination, metformin with DP4 inhibitors, metformin with thyroid, metformin with SGLT2 inhibitors. So which combination you will prefer in which group of patients from the very beginning? I am talking of again initialization of this combination therapy. How do you give to your patients in which this combination, into which patients you will give which combinations?
Bharat, I have a small suggestion. Bharat,
Yes,
the country like Arnav's Republic TV country wants to know, nation wants to know the biodata of Om Lakhani, Shivendra, and
yeah.
So
Sorry,
we have not shown it. They are most eligible bachelors. So country wants to know. Will you kindly just allow us to put the biodata, please? Harshit, please start the biodata. Harshit, biodata. Yes, and Shankar Subra Sen has not been into. It's the first time in our program, Bharat, please. So let us introduce him.
Yeah.
So Shankar, so you can read it, Bharat, yourself. Shankar Subra Sen is one of the MD gold medalist and PG diploma in diabetes and senior consultant at Darjeeling, Siliguri, and he is the Secretary General of the North Bengal API. Shankar, welcome, Shankar. Next.
Yeah, welcome.
Dr. Sibendra Burma is again a young endo from CMC Vellore, and he's consultant endocrinologist at Raipur, and they have got 5 research papers at the young age and 3 case reports, and written already 1 book chapter. And he works in the type 1 diabetes complication, fibropancreatic diabetes. I think he got an award some time back also, and pituitary dysfunction in the neurosurgical patients. And Om Lakhani, our own Om, Jayant did not be introduced. He is the top of the world. Om is the designation, is the consultant endocrinologist, and he's from the Zydus Hospital, Hyderabad. And I have done some sessions with Om, wonderful session in the endocrinology with him. And he has been MBBS, MD, and DNB in endocrinology, winner of the President's NB Gold Medal that is given to the person who secures highest mark amongst all the DNB, and national winner of the ESI Taisha in 2016. And he was Evi Gandhi, USB's Evi Gandhi Award. He was the second, and winner of 2 gold medals in MD and 5 gold medals. I don't know how many gold medals Mrs. Om will be having in her neck, and has winner of API, Dr. Bital Rao lecture. We gave him that lecture for the best thesis in MD medicine. Thank you, Bharat, for allowing me to read the biodata. I purposely omit Jayant's biodata because Jayant is no more eligible. So Jayant's biodata I didn't give.
Jayant is not eligible for introduction.
Bachelor, he is not eligible bachelor.
and also same thing for Abhay. Please, Bharat sir, please continue. Please continue.
Thank you, sir.
No, please continue.
We are fortunate to get these young
Yes, sir. And I know, sir. And I must say you, tell you, I think this USB session has been so beautiful. Sir, the concepts are totally new. Low dose. What Abhay said is fantastic, and what John said is superb. John said about low dose combination 0.5. That has not come to the light. And those papers he quoted from the AK Singh, Ritu Singh, from the Carnino and Karimata, they are absolutely fabulous. So these two talks have been revolutionary. Abhay, thank you very much. And of course, Om, thank you very much for the wonderful concept given. Please continue, Bharat. I'm sorry for the interruption, but I thought it's necessary.
No, sir. Yeah, Dr. Shibendra, please.
Yeah, sir. So thank you for asking this question. So I'm still new in this field. Maybe you guys are more experienced for this. So depending upon the combination drugs, yes, I do use it. We all use it. And it all depends on the patient per se and the comorbidities that he is having. So I work in a hospital where I get a lot of patients from the cardiac side. And a lot of patients come with the history of acute coronary syndrome in the past, or they are having a ejection fraction in the range of 20 to 30%. In those subjects, I have to choose a medicine which should be minimal, because they are already on a 5, 6, or 8 medicines. They are taking statins on high doses, hypertensives, and cardiac medications 3 to 4. So I cannot afford to add 2 to 3 individual medications. So here comes the use of fixed dose combination medicines. And in that, metformin invariably is there, because metformin is a first line drug. We all prefer that medications. And then I decide which is going to be the safest medication in that patient. For example, if the patient is very elderly, in the late 70s or 80s, I just avoid high doses of glimepiride. But if their cost is an issue, then this 0.5 milligram of glimepiride helps a lot in those patients. It keeps the glucose in check with a very less risk of hypoglycemia. And invariably, we don't give very high dose of metformin. So a 0.5 milligram of glimepiride and 500 milligram of metformin twice daily works very well in those subjects. On the other hand, if the glycemic level is not very high, I do give metformin with DPP4 inhibitors also in those subjects, because DPP4 inhibitors, although we don't have an evidence database for a robust cardioprotection or renoprotection, but the good thing with DPP4 inhibitors, they are around 15 years old, and we don't find any significant side effects. Even it is easy to say that SGLT2 inhibitors have a lot of good benefits, but I do see where quite often many patients are leaving these medications because of even minor UTIs, and they are very afraid of restarting those medications. So there was a case few days back that I started SGLT2 inhibitor in a cardiac patient post-discharge, and she landed up in frank UTI. So this comes in day-to-day practice, which might not be reflected in the major clinical trials. As rightly said, there is a role of fixed dose combination. We all have to use it. I would just individualize what kind of fixed dose combination might work for my patient. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Shivendra. It is a individualized treatment, so you have to individualize whom to give which combination. That's right. You're right. So next, I will ask Dr. Sen.
Yes.
Dr. Sen, you will agree with me that defective insulin secretion and insulin resistance are the major factors in case of type 2 diabetes. And you will agree with me that I think pioglitazone or thiazolidinedione, that is the best insulin sensitizer we have got among all the OADs. But unfortunately, during the last few years, again, everybody is a little hesitant to write the pioglitazone. And as all of you know, all the drugs, they have got some adverse effects. They have got also good effects. All the drugs, whatever we use. So what is your opinion regarding pioglitazone? Why should we use rampantly? Because it's a very good insulin sensitizer. And beyond that, it has got also many pleiotropic actions. In liver, in the brain, and many pleiotropic actions. So why we are not using the pioglitazone? Why should we use rampantly? Yes, what is your opinion?
Thank you, sir, Dr. Panigrahi. The topic today is very interesting. And when our first speaker started with the Ominas octet, you see in type 2 diabetes mellitus, the first important thing we came to know was regarding the insulin resistance. So definitely a good insulin sensitizer would have been and should be our first choice in treating diabetes mellitus along with metformin. So the pioglitazone is such a molecule which is one of the best insulin sensitizers, and it acts along with rosiglitazone. The infamous thing when Dr. Nissen came out with the meta-analysis regarding the cardiac side effects and all, and then pioglitazone still was definitely in the field because we at that time only oral antidiabetic drugs available were the sulfonylureas, the metformin, and the pioglitazone after rosiglitazone was out of the market. But the sad event occurred on 18th of June 2013 when pioglitazone was sometime off the market because of the Government of India regulations. And after such hue and cry, after the side effects and everything were shown, in 1.5 month time, on 31st of July 2013, again pioglitazone was allowed to be marketed. But much harm has been done during that time. And at that time, when it was banned in India, within inverted commas, I should say banned, it was a big thing because the confidence of the physicians prescribing pioglitazone was shaken. The most important thing we all knew regarding the fluid retention we should avoid in patients who are having edema due to causes like congestive cardiac failure and all. We knew that we shouldn't prescribe it in elderly females who are having osteoporosis because there are chances of bone fractures. But when the chances of bladder carcinoma was highlighted in 2013, and that was the time when the hue and cry broke out, and ultimately it was not being prescribed such in such volume which was earlier. But we are confident. We physicians know in who we have to select carefully the patients, not the elderly females, not the persons who are having cardiovascular morbidity. If we can select judiciously in lean and thin patients, not obese ones, then definitely if we can avoid the weight gain, we can avoid the fluid retention, we can avoid the chances of bone fractures. And if we can screen the patients if there are chances of urinary bladder carcinoma or not, we can definitely and safely use pioglitazone even today. And nowadays we are getting very low doses also. At that time, doses were available at around 30 milligram or 15 milligram. Now 7.5 milligram is also available. So if we can judiciously choose our patients, definitely pioglitazone is a good choice still. But much harm has been done during those 1.5 months in 7 years back. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sen. Really, yeah.
Dr. Panigrahi sir, I want to ask Om. Dr. Joyan Panda sir has actually given an idea that you can give a fixed dose combination of glimepiride, metformin with pioglitazone along with insulin. So, what is your opinion regarding use of pioglitazone along with insulin?
You see,
So,
all the,
Sir, Om, let Om I'm giving his own opinion, then we'll ask the other people.
Yeah, Dr.
yes, sir. So one of the challenges of traditionally, which we have thought of using insulin, especially Indian patients requiring higher doses. We know that we are more insulin resistant compared to a thing. So if I start the patient on, let's say, a basal insulin, or my requirement would be pretty much on an average 24 units or 25 units of basal insulin compared to a Western counterpart who might do well with maybe a 10 and 12 as well. So in that scenario, when we're combining, insulin with pioglitazone, there is a potentiality of causing more fluid retention, causing, perhaps, worsening of edema in certain patients. That's a theoretical concern, though in practice, what we have seen is that, when we do combine, and a lot of these patients, we rightly said, we are using much lower doses of pioglitazone now in today's world compared to, in the past, where we, maybe 30 milligram was an average dose. Nowadays, it's rare to find anybody prescribing 30 milligram. So I think in my experience, using doses of 7.5 or 15 milligram has its own effectiveness. It's an effective drug in those doses, but at the same time, the concern with using higher dose of insulin causing more fluid retention in combination is not there. And having said that, I think, for any oral anti-diabetic drug, the most important thing is actually to, select the right patient for the right drug. And I think for a patient who is already, likely to have fluid retention, patients already on, compromised renal function, perhaps, already having cardiac issues, in such cases, I would avoid pioglitazone altogether. Insulin, though, may not be avoided because, you would require that to be used. One of the challenges of a triple drug combination, and, two drugs are fine, but when you use a third drug, one of the challenges is that it reduces the flexibility of us in titrating the dose of medications when required in future. So if you already prescribe a patient a particular molecule which already has, let's say, 15 milligram of pioglitazone or 7.5 milligram of pioglitazone, if I want to kind of titrate the same medicine, I might have to increase the dose of all of them or reduce the dose of all of them, which would have impact. And we know that these are, especially when you're adding a glimepiride, you are using a pretty effective and robust anti-diabetic drug. In which case, if you increase the dose, you might have to, make changes in other medications, or reduce the dose again, you might have to titrate accordingly. So I think, up to 2 drug combination, I feel that, there is a lot of benefit. But when you go to a 3 drug, unless you're very sure that you're not going into too much into titration, you are just going to give this in a sort of a standalone way. It makes sense. But if you're using an insulin and where you might require dose titration of other oral antidiabetics, I would prefer using pioglitazone separately, if used at all, and that would be a preferred choice.
Thank you. Bharat sir, you are mute. Unmute yourself. Bharat sir, you are unmute yourself.
Yeah. So thanks, Dr. Lakhani. Studies have shown that in Asians, especially low dose pioglitazone, that is 7.5 to 15, it has got maximum effect with that low dose. So we should not go beyond 15 milligram in our people. Number one. Number two, you have told you will not prefer pioglitazone with insulin. But Abha's concerns is also that. But if you go through the ADA recommendations, ADA 2020, ADA 2021, in all the recommendations they have shown, if somebody is taking very high dose of insulin, and if you want to reduce the dose of insulin, there are only 2 drugs are recommended. One is the SGLT2 inhibitors, and the other is the thiazolidine. I don't know how what is the rationality, but it is recommended in ADA 2020, 2021, and I have also raised this question in various forums, but still till date I have not got any right answer. So if anybody can, if anybody can just comment.
No,
Yeah.
I completely agree, sir. I mean, in fact, insulin in practice also we have seen that insulin dose requirement, it becomes lower when you, and exactly the 2 drugs which you talked about, which are pretty effective in doing that. The only theoretical concern, though, like I said, it's more theoretical and more to do with higher doses of pioglitazone and higher doses of insulin in combination, is that there could be more fluid retention with the combination of the 2. So that's the only concern, I guess. Again, those concerns are more theoretical than in practice, because in practice we are using much lower dose of pioglitazone, like you rightly said, and perhaps even insulin. I think at a lot of times, when you're combining with pioglitazone, your dose requirement will be lower. So I agree with you. But like I said, the only issue is basically in a theoretical sense, and there are people who there is a sort of school of thought that both the drugs in higher combinations can potentially lead to more fluid retention. That's the main sort of
Since it is a very good insulin
I think
sensitive.
Bharat Babu, as you rightly said, and Om has beautifully explained. I mean, you know the answer, Bharat, and you are a giant in diabetes.
No,
I must tell you that when we talk of BITS therapy, bedtime insulin or anytime insulin, plus sulfonylurea, standing for any oral drug, we do not talk about pioglitazone for the reason you have yourself said. However low dose of pio you may use, there is a chance of very, very severe weight gain, especially in those people who are genetically prone. Om, am I correct? because we
True,
have
sir.
found 3 to 4 kg weight gain in some people. The second issue is that the advantages are the dose of insulin comes down, the blood pressure is also comes down, and the hypoglycemia is nil. Perhaps that's a great advantage. Hypoglycemia is almost nil.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Please continue. Please continue,
Yeah.
Bharat.
So coming to Professor Abha's topic, and Professor Abha has turned to from a moderator to a speaker. So now I'll ask Professor Abha Sahu. Abha, in your slides you have shown, it is rightly, yes, this I have also gone through all these studies where metformin has been shown to reduce the mortality in case of COVID-19. And these retrospective studies, they have shown these people who had used metformin before they are getting infected, and that benefit they have got if they are infected at all with COVID-19. Okay. So my point is, use of metformin when somebody is infected, because there are many guidelines. They say don't use metformin because of there is every chance of lactic acidosis. Don't use SGLT2 inhibitor. There is every chance of ketoacidosis. So there are guidelines they say. So should we use metformin during COVID-19 infection?
Yeah, two things, important things, sir. If someone is a diabetic already on metformin, you can continue metformin in mild to moderate case. Of course, if someone is having a severe COVID infection, strictly contraindicated, nothing is allowed. But if someone is diabetic, not only on metformin, any drug patient is there, if blood glucose is well controlled, you can continue that medication without any hesitation. The thing is that blood sugar should remain controlled. Second thing comes is what we have discussed, metformin with lactic acidosis, probably as Om has already told, it's just like a theoretical list. Probably nobody has might have seen throughout their life about the lactic acidosis, or someone might have seen one cases throughout the life. So it's just a theoretical. But of course, why SGLT2 part is coming? Because whenever the patient is on SGLT2, it induces some sort of a catabolic phase initially. So it's not like that the patient will develop ketoacidosis. It's not like that. But that catabolic phase, because from already having infection, initially a catabolic phase is not good for the patient. So if someone is on SGLT2, in my view, that should be stopped for particularly moderate to severe cases. Of course, in mild case, even if SGLT2, someone can continue without any hesitation. If in mild cases, a lot of people are staying at home, their only home quarantine is sufficient for them. So in that cases, even if someone can continue SGLT2 without any hesitation. But if someone is not on any drug, admitted to the hospital and starting metformin at that time, for me is not judicious. I will not start. The reason is, again, the study has also similarly shown that starting metformin at that time has also not shown any benefit during the hospital stay. So I am not, even if in mild case, if someone is a diabetic, I am not that much actually, I'll be a little bit skeptical to start in metformin at that time. Otherwise, if someone is on those drugs, I can continue without hesitation.
Thank you, Dr. Abha. So I will be asking my next to Dr. Sen. Dr.
Yes,
Sen,
sir.
you have seen this OADs in COVID-19. Coming to DPP4 inhibitors, you see, it has been seen in the MERS virus. They have seen that, you see, H2 inhibitors are there for the SARS-2, H2 receptors are there for this SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 virus to penetrate the cell. Similarly, there are also DPP4 inhibitors which were there, and this MERS virus, that virus was penetrating in the cells through that DPP4 receptors. And it is also, now people are also thinking DPP4 inhibitors are also another receptor through which this COVID-19 virus, this COVID-19 virus also penetrates to the cells. So this DPP4 inhibitor practically, theoretically has got advantage that by giving DPP4 inhibitor, we also inhibit the penetration of this virus into the cell. So theoretically that is there. So what is your opinion on that? Should we give DPP4 inhibitors to all the patients, also COVID-19 patient, to get that advantage?
Yes, sir. So among these, all the oral antidiabetic drugs we are discussing today, probably DPP4 inhibitor has the maximum advantages because the DPP4 enzymes with the receptors which are already there and which you are inhibiting with the DPP4 inhibitors, the DPP4 they usually act as like T cell antigen, like it was initially called CD26, anti-CD26. So these receptors, which are located not only on the epithelium, the endothelium, and also on the adipocytes and the lymphocytes, definitely they act, as you said, like the SCA2 receptors, and the prevention of entry into the body and the viral load can be definitely has been shown to be theoretically decreased when we are using DPP4 inhibitors, because the DPP4 receptors similarly when are blocked by the DPP4 inhibitors, then definitely the chance of severe COVID infection has been shown to be decreased. So DPP4 usage in COVID-19 has an added advantage compared to other oral antidiabetic drugs in this COVID scenario.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sen. So now I'll be, if there is time, I'll be going to another question because of this now this session is for OADs only. OADs are the pillar of type 2 diabetes. So you will agree with that. Now HLT2 inhibitors are coming in a big way. I think
Bharat Babu, I'll request you to kindly give your comments first because this session was up to 3 o'clock. So we have got another 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes you can spend time.
Yes, sir.
Ask questions and by 5 minutes to 3 kindly conclude.
So we have got 10 minutes, sir.
10 minutes minimum.
Oh yes, sir. Thank you. So now I'll ask, because you see SGLT2 inhibitors now it is coming a big way and it has been hijacked by different people. The cardiologists, the nephrologists, they have also hijacked this molecule from the diabetologists. Now I'll ask you, because we have seen many severity trials where this HA2 inhibitors have also been proven as for primary prevention. So I will ask all the 3 panelists, all 4 panelists also, including Abha, should we use in all the cases as a primary prevention HA2 inhibitors? Yeah, start. You, Dr. Shivendra, you start.
Thank you, sir, for this very important question. So, no, sir, I don't agree that it should be started as a primary prevention drug in all the patients. And it is not very difficult to choose our patient who should be eligible to get SGLT2 inhibitors. So, those patients who already have a ASCVD, definitely we have to start. Even in them, I have some questions. So some patients do come in this center who had a first MI in the 2012. Now they are coming in 2020. Last 8 years, they have been asymptomatic. No single attack. They have been living nicely. They had a good effort tolerance also. And they are doing good on glimepiride and metformin. HbA1c is well controlled. And suddenly they send to me for an endocrine opinion. So why should I start SGLT2 inhibitor in a 72-year-old gentleman? So this is one area which is really need to be explored, that who are the best patients in which SGLT2 inhibitor should be given, even though they had established ASCVD, because many a times there are a lot of side effects are there, and it is very disturbing for some of the patients. And I'm afraid in those old age patients, male patients who have prostate disease also. So in those patients, if I start, the risk of infection do increase. So that is one. Another one is the primary prevention. That means those who don't have any established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So in those subjects, I start in those subjects who have multiple risk factors. So if they are actively smoking, hypertensive, they have a deranged lipid profile, then I do prefer. But again, it is said that if they have a history of recurrent UTIs or a scarred kidney on ultrasound, history of pyelonephritis, I do avoid, because if in nearby future any harm is there, then they are definitely going to stop the medication and they won't return back. So, and definitely younger patients less than 50 years of age of type 2 diabetes, or even type 1 diabetics of less than 10 years duration with no other risk factors, perfectly doing fine, lipid profile is okay, creatinine is okay, I do not start on SGLT2 inhibitors. So that is from my take. I still have my doubts. And even you said very nicely that this drug is now overused by the cardiologist and nephrologist also. So recently I reviewed regarding dapagliflozin. So dapagliflozin was the one drug which was used for both the heart failure prevention in DAPA-HF and for the CKD prevention in the DAPA-CKD. Now the contradictory findings I found is that in DAPA-CKD, they did not find any CV mortality risk reduction. Only heart failure reduction, that is acceptable. That will be there. There's no question of that. And in DAPA heart failure trial, which supposed to get a good renal protection, there was insignificant renal protection. So I don't know how they play with the data, but we should be skeptical, especially in those who are non-diabetic. I'm still not using this drug in non-diabetic subjects. I just leave it on the cardiologist and nephrologist to use that drug. So that is from my side, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. But SCCHA has already come out in primary
Yes.
prevention, these SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 agonist with proven benefit.
Yes.
So, Dr. Sen, what is your opinion?
Sir, since the European Society of Cardiology guidelines, which came out way back 2 to 3 years back in 2018 and 19, nowadays they are using as a first line, more or less, even in a non-diabetic patient. So regarding guidelines, we don't have an issue. We have to choose our patients judiciously. As for us who are treating diabetes mellitus patients, type 2 diabetes, each and every molecule, it has its advantages and disadvantages. Again, as per individual patient's need, we can add. And definitely the patients who are having high deranged lipid profile, who are having history of cardiac diseases, definitely it's a very, after metformin, definitely it's a first line choice now. Even after the ADA recent guidelines also has said that if there is chance of nephropathy, if the patient is having the EGFR is going down to certain extent, definitely that is a good time, because we as diabetologists, we try to use an SC inhibitor or an ARB to decrease the intraglomerular hypertension. So even in hypertensive, for hypertension, definitely it's a first choice in diabetic patients. Similarly, if we can add as a protective mechanism for those patients who are progressing to renal failure, like the DAPA-CKD trial has shown, and even in patients who are having atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and chances of heart failure, we have to choose our patients judiciously, and as per a patient's need, we definitely can add after metformin as the second line choice. So the SGLT2 inhibitors that definitely has come up in our armamentarium in the first line after metformin to treat these patients with particular risk factors.
So people with multiple risk factors, if there is no contraindication, then we should use SGLT2 inhibitor with metformin to prevent cardiovascular disease. My last question, I think, if Professor Das will allow, I'll ask the last question.
Yeah, please, sir, please.
Yeah. Last question. I think Professor Sahu and Om will answer. So now we see people using, even with multiple insulin injections, people are using multiple OADs. There are multiple doses of insulin. There are also multiple OADs. So for our audience, our message should go. What our message should go? Yeah. First, I will ask Dr. Sahu. People who are using multiple doses of insulin, how should we give also? What are the OADs we should give, and what we should not give?
Yeah. So thank you, sir. So probably partly we have answered this question in our previous discussion. Yeah. Because as we have already discussed, when the insulin requirement is significantly higher, and we know that itself a very high dose of insulin is also it's a costly affair for the patient. So to reduce the dose of insulin, to reduce the particularly even if at some point of time to number of injections, to plan to reduce the number of injections. So we plan to start some OHA. If you are using OHA, then probably for me metformin, DP4 inhibitors, SGLT2 inhibitors, and particularly these AGIs, alpha glucosidase inhibitors. These are the ideal drugs can be used with particularly any sort of insulin. But at some point of time, a lot of the time, whatever we are seeing that few people are using, even if some of the studies are there where they have used 2 doses of insulin along with also particularly sulfonylureas, and that is just to reduce the number of injections, or even if to significantly reduce the doses of insulin. And if someone is on particularly specifically basal bolus or full dose basal bolus of 4 injections, then sulfonylurea group of drugs is strictly not allowed. In that case, only as I have discussed, probably metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors, DP4 inhibitors, and if required, AGI can be used in those groups. And these drugs can be used with insulin without any hesitations. Of course, the only reservation is for particularly sulfonylureas. The only place where you can, if you want to reduce the number of injections, or as Sarah has already discussed, bridge therapy like one type insulin and one type OHA, in that case, actually you can plan for sulfonylureas. Otherwise, sulfonylureas are not the ideal drugs to be combined with insulins, except that any other drugs can be used. And as also Oma has already discussed regarding the glitazone point of view, you can go for low dose glitazones, and I am also not in favor of giving high dose glitazones along with insulins. This is my view for particularly use of OHA in insulin point of view. And any additional thing Om you want?
Yes, sir. I agree with you. If my patient is on a basal bolus insulin, my concern then is hypoglycemia, which is primary concern, because titration of a basal bolus is little more complex than when we do it in a basal only or a premix. So I would avoid using sulfonylurea, because again that is the differentiating factor which leads to hypoglycemia. But in general, again completely agree with what you said. And in general, my philosophy of any diabetes management per se is to keep things simple. The more simple you keep it, the less moving parts we have in the system, the more better we have in terms of long-term adherence of the patient, as well as for us to kind of titrate and adjust the doses required. So whenever I start any medicine, my idea is how I'm going to titrate this medication, how I'm going to do it without causing a risk of hypoglycemia. So if my patient is on if I'm switching a patient from an oral anti-diabetic with a premix or a basal to basal bolus, my idea would be, if I want to up titrate the dose of my basal bolus insulin, I want to, adjust the insulin doses, I would have to, do it at a risk of hypo. So I'd avoid the SUs. I'll start cutting out the SUs. I'll start cutting out some of the other medications which can potentially lead to hypoglycemia. The same way, if my patient is on a multiple, dose insulin, and I, want to down titrate the therapy, and I want to switch over, I often switch over to either a basal with a GLP, or a basal only with oral anti-diabetic, in which case I stop the short-acting insulin and add a sulfonylurea if necessary. So generally speaking, I completely agree with.
I think we have to conclude. Om. Friends, it's now my duty to thank the chairpersons, dear Jayashree and dear Dr. M.K. Chotrai. I thank both the speakers, Jayant and Abhay. Wonderful job on the low dose combination and metformin. I'm amazed the amount of information you presented. It's great. I've never heard this lecture before. It is wonderful. I wrote a chapter in one of the micro books about the repurposed metformin. I have to modify it now. Now, Jayant, you are superb. Jayant is here. Jayant, you are superb. And I must thank Bharat Panigrahi, as usual, unusually knowledgeable and beautiful discourse. And of course, Abhay again for the dual role of the speaker and also the panelist. And I great honor to thank Dr. Shankar Shubhra Sen, Dr. Shailendra Burma, and Dr. Om Lakhani, and of course, Jayant Pandit, the speaker. And thank you very, very much, dear friends. Our sincere, we'll again continue our program right now. Thank you very, very much.